In the midst of the vast, frozen desert of the Arctic, where life is a constant battle against the cold and isolation, a young polar bear struggles to take its final steps. Its body, covered in a grotesque crust of hardened barnacles, weighs, like invisible chains, crushing its strength, stealing its freedom. It cannot run, it cannot hunt. Abandoned and hopeless, it is doomed to vanish into the endless white, until a helicopter appears on the horizon. Time is running out, and the team of scientists who spot it face an impossible choice. Let nature take its course or break the rules to save a life the world has already forgotten. Wind howled across the endless white desert of the Arctic, cutting through the frozen wasteland like a blade. In the distance, the pale sun barely pierced through thick clouds, casting the landscape in shades of blue and gray. The cold was absolute, merciless. Inside a helicopter soaring over the tundra, Dr. Jonathan Hayes adjusted his binoculars, scanning the vast, unbroken expanse below. As a biologist specializing in Arctic ecosystems, he had witnessed the brutal realities of nature countless times. But something about this mission unsettled him. Beside him, Mia Caldwell, a research scientist, typed data into her tablet, recording temperature changes and ice drift measurements. "We're over Sector 3. No signs of bear activity," she muttered, not looking up from the screen. Jonathan exhaled, frustration creeping into his chest. Over the past few years, the polar bear population in this region had declined dramatically. The ice was melting faster than ever, forcing the animals to travel greater distances in search of food. But now something even worse seemed to be happening. Then Mia's voice broke the silence. "Wait, what is that?" She pointed to a spot in the snow far below them. Jonathan quickly adjusted the zoom on his binoculars. There, in the middle of the vast white landscape, a lone polar bear cub was wandering across the ice. But something was wrong. The way it moved. The cub limped forward, dragging its hind legs as if carrying an unbearable weight. Jonathan felt a chill creep up his spine. One that had nothing to do with the cold. "Lower our altitude. I want a closer look." The helicopter descended smoothly, and as the swirling snow settled, the scene became even more disturbing. The young polar bear was covered in grotesque clusters of hardened barnacles and frozen algae. They clung to its legs, neck, and back, forming a thick, unnatural shell that restricted its movements. Mia sucked in a breath. "Oh my God! It's trapped inside its own body." Jonathan clenched his jaw. He had seen barnacles latch onto sea turtles and whales before, but a polar bear? This was something new, something unnatural. The cub lifted its head slightly, staring toward the helicopter with tired golden eyes. It didn't run. It couldn't. Jonathan's stomach twisted. He knew exactly what this meant. The cub was already doomed. If it couldn't move freely, it couldn't hunt. If it couldn't hunt, it wouldn't survive. And the most tragic part? Its mother had likely already abandoned it, sensing that it had no chance. Mia turned to Jonathan, her expression conflicted. "If we don't do something, it's going to die." Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment. He knew the rules. In the wild, intervention could sometimes do more harm than good. But this cub wasn't dying because of natural causes. It was being crushed by something that shouldn't be there. The radio crackled with the pilot's voice. "Storm inbound in 3 hours. If you're going to do something, you need to act fast." Jonathan looked back at the cub, which had now collapsed onto the ice, too exhausted to move. The frozen landscape stretched endlessly around it, cold and indifferent. But he couldn't be indifferent. He grabbed the radio and took a deep breath before responding. "Prepare the rescue protocol. We're bringing it aboard." The team exchanged glances, aware of the risks. But no one hesitated. Outside, the wind howled even louder. Time was against them. And this perhaps was the cub's only chance to be saved. To be continued. The helicopter hovered just above the frozen ground, its blades whipping up a blizzard of snow and ice. The Arctic storm was drawing closer, and every second counted. On the ground, Dr. Jonathan Hayes and his team moved carefully across the unstable ice. Each step had to be precise. The frozen surface was riddled with hidden cracks, and one wrong move could send them plunging into the deadly cold below. Ahead of them, the young polar bear lay motionless, its breath slow and labored. The grotesque barnacles and frozen algae clinging to its body had fused into a thick, rock-like crust, turning its own skin into a prison. Jonathan knelt beside the cub, his eyes scanning its frail form. He's incredibly weak. If we don't act fast, he won't make it. Mia Caldwell, the research scientist beside him, hesitated as she held a syringe filled with a mild sedative. "Are you sure this is the best approach?" Jonathan nodded. "We can't risk him panicking and injuring himself further. We need to sedate him just enough to transport him safely." Mia exhaled sharply before pressing the needle against the thick fur and injecting the dose. The cub let out a soft, pained grunt before his breathing slowed slightly. He wasn't unconscious, but he was calm enough for them to work. Now, the real battle began. The fight against the barnacles, Jonathan and Mia began examining the hardened shells attached to the bear's body. They weren't just on the surface, some were embedded into his fur and skin. "We'll need warm water to soften the largest ones. If we try to rip them off, we could cause serious injuries," Mia said, reaching for a portable heating sprayer. Dr. Daniel Foster, another team member, set down a container of antiseptic solution. "Some of these barnacles have been on him for months," he muttered, carefully peeling away a thick layer near the bear's neck. The process was painstaking and delicate. For every barnacle they removed, a fresh wound was revealed beneath, some of them raw and bleeding from where the parasites had burrowed in. Despite their careful work, time was against them. The helicopter pilot's voice crackled through the radio. "You have 20 minutes before the winds become too strong for an extraction." Jonathan gritted his teeth. "We need to move faster." Mia wiped sweat from her forehead despite the cold. "What if he still can't move after this?" Jonathan hesitated. "Then we'll carry him." The words hung heavy in the air. Transporting an injured polar bear in Arctic conditions was not a simple task, but if they left him behind now, he was as good as dead. The crucial decision, finally the last barnacle was removed. Mia wiped the cub's fur clean, her hands shaking slightly from the cold. The suffocating weight was gone, but the question remained. Could he still stand? Jonathan exchanged a look with Mia and Daniel. "We need to test him. If he can move on his own, we'll release him in a safer area with access to food. If not, we take him with us." The team took a step back and waited. For long seconds, the cub remained still. Then, he twitched his paw. Mia held her breath. The bear's golden eyes fluttered open as he slowly tried to push himself up. His muscles shook, his legs wobbled, and then he collapsed back onto the snow. Jonathan felt the weight of the moment settle over him. "We can't leave him here. He doesn't have the strength yet." The radio crackled again. "Winds are hitting 70 km/h. If you don't leave now, we won't be able to get you out." Jonathan made the call. "We're bringing him with us. Secure the transport straps." The team worked quickly, fastening a reinforced harness around the cub. Above them, the helicopter positioned itself for extraction, lowering the rescue cables. With extreme care, the young polar bear was lifted into the freezing Arctic sky. Jonathan climbed aboard the helicopter, watching as the icy landscape disappeared beneath them. Down below, the wind screamed across the ice, as if warning them that if they had hesitated just a moment longer, the bear's fate would have been sealed. But now he had a second chance. To be continued. The helicopter swayed violently as the wind howled outside, cutting through the dark Arctic sky. The storm was getting closer, threatening to turn their mission into a race against disaster. But inside the cabin, no one was thinking about the storm. All eyes were on the young polar bear, lying motionless on the rescue platform, wrapped in thermal blankets. His breathing was slow but steady. He was alive. Dr. Jonathan Hayes gripped the metal railing inside the aircraft, his mind racing. The cub had endured everything: hunger, the cold, the suffocating weight of the barnacles. But now, his greatest challenge lay ahead: survival. Beside him, Mia Caldwell knelt next to the bear, carefully monitoring his vitals. He's still weak, but his heart rate is stable. Jonathan gave a small nod. He knew what was coming next. The hardest part wasn't the rescue. It was deciding what to do now. The dilemma. The radio crackled with the pilot's voice. "Doctor, we're 20 minutes from base. Are you bringing him in for rehabilitation, or do we attempt a release?" Jonathan looked at the bear, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on him. If they took him to a rehabilitation center, he might never fully adapt to life in the wild again. But if they released him too soon, before he had regained his strength, he wouldn't survive. Mia broke the silence, sensing his hesitation. "We have to at least try. If he shows any ability to move on his own, there's a chance." Jonathan exhaled slowly. It wasn't their job to decide the bear's future, only to give him the opportunity to choose. "All right, take us to a safe ice floe," the pilot acknowledged, changing course toward a stable ice sheet where other polar bears had been recently sighted. As the helicopter descended, the frozen expanse stretched beneath them, an endless, unforgiving wilderness of white and blue. The release. The aircraft hovered just above the ice. The cargo hatch opened, letting in the frigid wind as the bear lay motionless, his fur ruffled by the cold air. Jonathan and Mia carefully removed the thermal blankets. The bear blinked slowly, golden eyes flickering with exhaustion, but also awareness. He was still weak, but now he was free of the weight that had once trapped him. Jonathan crouched beside him and murmured, "It's your choice now." For a moment, the bear didn't move. Then he twitched a paw. Mia held her breath. The cub stretched his legs, trembling as he tried to push himself up. His muscles shook, struggling against exhaustion. He wobbled, nearly collapsed, but he didn't give up. He stood. The team watched in silence as the bear took a tentative step, then another. His movements were slow but determined. And then he started walking. Jonathan felt something tighten in his chest. The bear moved farther across the ice, gaining strength with each step. Then he stopped. He turned his head, looking back at them. His golden eyes held no fear, no pain, only freedom. And then, without hesitation, he turned and walked into the vast Arctic wilderness. The radio crackled with the pilot's voice. He did it. Jonathan swallowed the lump in his throat. Yes, he did. And in the cruel, unforgiving Arctic, survival was the greatest miracle of all. The end. The Arctic may be unforgiving, but this story proves that even in the harshest places, survival is possible. Want to see another incredible rescue story? Click on the next video now. Watch it before it disappears.